I'm happy to welcome you all tonight. Thank you for coming. This is the second in the fall series of talks that are part of the Landscape Across the Disciplines Research Workshop. And that is co-coordinated by myself and my colleagues David Mark from the Geography Department and Tina Thurston from the Anthropology Department. And great to join us for other talks as well. You'll see posters around campus, and we've also put a sign-up sheet in the back if you'd like to be added to our listserv. I'd also like to acknowledge our funders. We are supported by the Humanities Institute, and this series this fall is also supported by the Department of Media Study and Open Air Institute. So we're very grateful for that support, and we're happy to also be providing, or rather focusing on a theme this fall of Native American and Indigenous perspectives on landscape. So I think you'll find the events quite interesting, and they continue to evolve through the year, so watch for our spring schedule as well. In fact, our spring schedule may well take us to New Mexico, which is where our guest tonight, Bill Gilbert, hails from. And I'm really honored and delighted to have him here tonight. Bill and I met in Santa Fe. I think my most vivid recollection of our first meeting was at a party in Albuquerque with students of his in the Art and Ecology program. And we were out just gazing at the sky because the moon was so vivid that night. And you know the skies out west are quite remarkable. And there's always this kind of incredible intimacy you feel for them feeling so close. Well, Bill also knows what he's looking at. And so our shared interest in geography and orientation and cartography as from artistic perspectives was immediately alive and well in that moment. And I found him not only orienting me to that vertical of above and below, connecting sky to earth, but also anchoring me in relating East Coast cultures to the West. And I'm myself from the West, but I haven't lived there in a long time. And Bill is from the East, but he's been in the West so long that he feels almost like a stranger coming here now. So I think what you'll discover in his perceptions, though, is this remarkable ability to really be at home in many different cultural contexts and to feel his own, feel comfortable in his own skin and to be able to learn and absorb and then share those insights through his practice and through his having founded the Land Arts of the American West program. So I'll summarize his bio just briefly and then we'll get on to the lecture. And I wanted to mention that he received his MFA from the University of Montana and has served on the faculty in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of New Mexico since 1988, where he holds the Lannan Chair as Director of the Land Arts of the American West program, which he'll discuss tonight. Gilbert is co-founder of the new Art and Ecology emphasis in studio art, which is quite innovative and it has become a model for many programs across the country that are burgeoning and emerging now. He's exhibited his place-based mixed media installation and video works internationally since 1981 and has participated in collaborative projects resulting in exhibitions in the US, Ecuador, the Czech Republic, and Canada. He received a Lila Wallace Arts International Grant in 1994 to work with the, I won't pronounce this correctly, the Quicho people of Ecuador, and has curated numerous exhibitions and written essays regarding the work of indigenous artists from the U.S. Pueblos, Juan Mata Ortiz, Mexico, and Pastaza, Ecuador. And you may also discover more of the research of the Land Arts of the West program in the book Land/Art, which is published by Radius Books and co-edited by Bill and his colleague Chris Taylor. So thank you again for coming this evening, and please welcome me and join me in welcoming Bill Gilbert.
Hola, buenas tardes. It's great to be here. As Terry said, I grew up on the East Coast, but I've been in New Mexico now for about 35 years, so I don't know where I am. I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Reed for inviting me to speak today. I became aware of Terry's work a few years ago. She mentioned in Santa Fe and I've been following closely since. Her research shares territories with what we're pursuing in art and ecology, and there are a lot of overlays there. So I'm sure you're aware that you're very lucky to have Terry here. I also want to thank Land Foundation and Andrew Mellon Foundation for the ongoing support that makes this program that we're talking about tonight possible. I'm going to run through the evolution of this experiment we've been doing. It's going to be kind of a free range. It's not targeted towards any particular discipline or audience. Hopefully there's something in there that we can then get into discussion about. I'm willing to go down whatever road, but this first is going to be fairly broad. The Land Arts of the American West program is an experiment in arts pedagogy. It's about 13 years old, and I created it out of frustration with an attempt to rethink how universities are pursuing arts education. My original thoughts, these are all part of the student. It's a relatively short time that art has even been part of academia. There were some early precedents on the East Coast, but in general, it wasn't until after World War II that arts really populated universities across the country, the GI Bill. And I'd say it's still a somewhat tentative relationship. We're not considered in the arts to be the equal of our colleagues in the hard sciences. We're not culturally valued at the same level. And I think it's been somewhat of a difficult forced marriage. The original programs after the Second World War were really designed to create more teachers to fill all these new programs that were open. And that movement is done. There are not a whole lot of new MFAs opening, and yet we continue to crank out MFA students. And this resembles something that some people would call a pyramid scam. But it's a concern to me, and I think some of my colleagues, is what is the utility of an MFA degree at this point in time? Another alternative is that people can go out of programs and succeed in the commodities market, in the art world, through selling work. But again, this is a relatively small percentage of people who graduate, and then it's particularly tough if you happen to be situated in Albuquerque. I don't know about Buffalo and how close you are to the major art centers, but it's a difficult shot. So my thought was that we needed an alternative to frame an education in the arts. Our goal is to find an education that prepares artists to work as professionals alongside other disciplines in the public and private sphere. And to do that, we have to identify the skills that are necessary and teach them. I'm also very interested in exploring the Land Arts program as a way to explore the possibility that pedagogy can be a respected aspect of creative research. That my side as a teacher and my side as an artist actually come together in the teaching, not being held apart, and that there is research happening in that zone. So this experiment began with an initial set of conditions. The mantra of my generation, think globally, act locally, translates to we're dealing with the same dominant Western canon that pervades all art programs across the country, but we have a very specific situation in New Mexico. New Mexico is not New York. What we share is the new, and the new has to do with our relationship to Europe. It probably doesn't have much to do. I would say that we live in a very different social and environmental context than you folks live in, and so the education ought to reflect that. So I started with the...
I just want to be sure that you're not expecting...
Yeah, it'll come in just a second. I'll stop talking and start showing you just a minute. So the idea was to start with no student left indoors and dissolve the remains of this culture-nature dialectic. Not through what I see happening in our program in general, which is we decided culture is part of nature, and therefore we don't have to worry about nature because we're nature in our culture. I'm interested in dissolving it by taking the students out and getting them in direct engagement with the world at large. Another way to say this is that we're trying to make the walls of academia permeable and move the context of education out of the ivory tower to the social and environmental communities of our region. This is not to say we want to burn down the ivory tower. This is just an alternative. It's not a war. We can peacefully coexist. To do this, we have to alter the cultural aspect of time. I think most of us are aware, if we travel to other countries, that America has a particular quality of time. The quality of time in New York is quite different from the quality of time in New Mexico, but it's hugely different if you go to other parts of the world. So the land arts model is 7 and 7, 24/7. We have to see people at 7 in the morning, we have to see them at 7 at night, and Sunday is the same as Monday, is the same as Wednesday, is the same as Friday. It's continuous time. And we try and make it seamless so that people can go into their projects and not be shifting the way we have to shift in American culture all the time. It also puts a connection between art and life because we live together out there. And so when it's art time and when it's life time is up to you to decide. Another fundamental component of the Land Arts program is we form a nomadic artist community. We travel together for almost 2 months. We form a social unit, and it's relatively non-hierarchical. Obviously, we're still in charge of faculty. But when you live with faculty and they get up and they do the same work schedule that you do, and they cook with you, and they clean with you, and they get wet with you, it creates a different conversation than what you have in a traditional classroom setting. And then we all share the basic issue of field work, the non-site, site-non-site dialectic of Smithson. How does what you had to do in the field translate back to the world? So these are all the things that we kind of undertook in forming this program. So now if I didn't screw everything up, we can move from words to images. I did screw everything up. Excuse me just a second. I got it all backwards. All right. Okay.
So you had done that one?
Yeah, just done this so that we wouldn't have to watch my.
Okay, so it's probably looking and trying to. Okay, there we go.
All right, but it's done the same thing to me, which is it started at the end. No, that's not trying to. Yeah.
You're telling me to
That's
use exactly this.
That's exactly what it is. See if we can
How's
get
that? We did that before. There we go.
Oh, so the Land Arts American West Department of Art History. This is our territory. Way up there at the top is the Great Salt Lake, childhood and all that stuff. Down here, Guatemala, Mexico. We go as far west as Lake Mead there. And then we had a partnership with UT Austin, so that's territory. You can see thinner lines, which are Great Basin, Colorado Plateau, and Chihuahua Desert. Those are the 3 ecozones we cover. Everyone gets 2 bags. You make your choices as to whether it's art or life stuff, but that's what you get, 2 bags. And off we go. Try and get off the pavement, onto the dirt as soon as possible. It is the American West. And so students use the signage as a way to then start making their own work. People do get lost, and if they do, they should relax. We set up camps in remote locations. We have everything we need with us. We cook in a rotation, 2 students or student and faculty every day. This is the famous Erica Osborne 3-stack. You get all 3 courses, you just eat your way from the top to the bottom. People consume vast quantities of food. We clean and run the whole kitchen operation together. People learn new life skills that they never had before. food becomes a big deal when you're traveling. I think everybody knows that, camping, living outdoors. It's amazing the volumes of food we have to purchase. Often in shopping centers or food marts or whatever. But we've gotten very interested in recent years in how we can access food as we travel. So this is Organic Farm in Utah, where we're gleaning the produce that we need. And that led to an investigation of wild foods. We camped at Sequoia Canyon, that's onions in Spanish. And it also turned out that it had potatoes. And that turned into an artwork by Claire Long called 48 Potatoes. If you live in the desert, water is a huge issue. When we're lucky, we can get water from springs like this at the north rim of the Grand Canyon. More often, we have to go to settlements and find the water. And the most often oasis in the Southwest is the gas station. Something I wouldn't have predicted going into. So again, this obsession with water funnels into this work by Julie Nang, where she photographed every landscape we went to through the lens of a bowl of water. Land art certainly gives you the opportunity to get intimate with the land. It also gives you a chance to experience the solace of open spaces. In our operation, you set up your tent wherever you want. It's just up to you to be able to find it and get back to the camp. And it gives you the opportunity to weave yourself into the landscape of the West. Two fundamental components when we first started was, if it's going to be place-based, we need to explore all the eco-niches of our region. And the second is, we need to look at cultural artifacts. So most people think of the Southwest as being all desert, but in fact it's a very complicated environment. So we try and hit the various components. So desert riparian. This is the Gila Wilderness, which is although Leopold is responsible for this, it's the oldest wilderness in the United States. Very healthy. Gila River, bottomlands, students taking advantage of the water, and the Rio Grande. So when we can, we try and get out on the Rio Grande. It's our mother river, and it is now our focus, but I'll get to that one in a little bit more in the future. This is the Rio Grande 3 days before it went dry. It has been said about the Rio Grande that it's the only river Mark Twain ever saw that needed irrigating. This is Lake El Vado Lake. It's near the headwaters of the Chama. After 5 years of drought, everything you see here from the trees down should be lake. And that's the kind of drought, I'm sure you've read about it, that we are experiencing in the West. One of the things we try and do, just because students get bored with Jen and myself, is bring visitors to work with us in the field. And so we bring critics, writers, and other artists. In this case, Lucy Lepard, and she's actually going around looking at the students' work in sight, in place, along the Rio Grande. Desert grasslands. Otero Mesa is one of the last remaining healthy desert grasslands in New Mexico. It's almost the border with Texas. These are volcanic cones. It's an amazing environment, and a grassland that is still healthy. So of course they want to drill for oil and gas. So we bring in the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance to talk about all the issues related to oil and gas and water and range management, and that leads to students doing pieces like this called 100 Straws Water Table. And this is another work done, that's the same landscape you were just seeing. It's a 12-foot by 26-foot drawing that A.B. Jones did in a week for our show at CCA, celebrating a performance piece that the students did around a marriage at Otero Mesa. There are several alpine sites. I just put in this one because it's probably our favorite. North Rim of the Grand Canyon. It's a place where we can actually get up in trees. This is where people get lost and work in a very different environment. This is from the video Granny's Got an Axe. This is Urban Guys Like to Get Naked. And this is Lighthouse, a piece of paper, architectural piece built by Nina in the Aspen Groves. This is one of the works that I've been doing, where I'm walking the constellations onto, that is a satellite map of where we're camped. And in this case, Orion the Hunter found bajillion mushrooms. Again, we try and bring in people to change the conversation. This is Bill Fox. Bill Fox is author, Void Grid and the Sign, Playa Works, but he's also now the director of the Art and Environment Center at the Nevada Art Museum. So he comes in and kind of gives the museum and curatorial view of the work to the students, again, right as they're working in the field. High Mesa, probably more what people think of when they talk about the Southwest. This is Muley Point, right down in here, about 1,000 feet is the San Juan River. And that's San Rafael Swell and San Rafael River, that little green strip. And this is the kind of camps we make in that mesa country. San Rafael River probably doesn't look so much like what you think of the river, but that in the Southwest that qualifies as a river. Works by Julian Nam, playing off of the scale disorientation that happens in these places like Muley Point. So those pieces are each about 3 inches tall. Blake Gibson, one of the more, how would I say, the more insane students I've ever worked with. And this is how he brought that idea back to the gallery situation. Eric Osborne again, tracing the landscape with the figure blocks out onto the back of the figure. And then this is how that translated back to a performance at the CCA in Santa Fe, where now the map is on the back of people who then cut out their shape and occupy the map. Again, try and bring artists to work with us. This is Mary Zongas, electronic artist. Whoa, very well off the edge. And she's teaching us dowels. According to Mary, there's a huge lake under this dry landscape. It's down 700 feet, so it doesn't do us a lot of good, but anyway, thousands of water. The big empty. Artists can just not resist the big empty, Bonneville salt flats. It's the blank canvas. It's too much. Lydia Carroll, ice. Gloria Haig, Biggie. Beatrice Thomas, it does things to your mind. And who knows what will grow on the salt bin. And I don't know what it is, but land art students like to do. And this is the salt flats after a rain. Really kind of amazing to see that landscape covered in 4 inches of water. Okay, so after you've been out there for a while, don't take the weatherman to know which way the wind blows. We get quite tuned into weather, if not climate. And we find ourselves in a direct engagement that has all sorts of aspects, including waking up to a frozen camp in the north rim of the Grand Canyon, with snow on the ground, including having to build a road here and cross an arroyo to get into our side of Tehillah. In the words of Ed Abbey, you're not in the wilderness unless there's something there that can eat you. But we are confident. We feel assured that knowing whatever our interests, he is watching over us. Okay, so the original access, that was eco niches. The other half of it was land art. And it all started right here for me with Mary Louise Garcia. I was being called an environmental artist, and I wasn't sure what that meant. And so I thought I should go to another culture and see how it translated. Mary is an Acoma potter, daughter of Lucy Lewis, one of the big three, photo pottery, if you're familiar at all with that. And everything that she needs to make this jewel right here comes from Acoma. And you spend, if you make pottery with Mary, most of your time going around getting the stones to make the paint, getting the clays to make the slip, getting the white clay to make the pots, grinding up the pot shards. And she was willing to teach us her notion of what a place-based practice was. So we started doing pottery in our first year. And I owe her an incredible debt. She taught me so much of what has come out in more recent years, and I didn't even know she taught it to me. Most of what we have a chance to engage with in terms of cultural interventions from Native culture is the architecture, the remnants. So this is Chaco Canyon, this is the Kiva. We meet with Jerry Brody, and he talks about how the theater of the Kiva was designed to express the world, the cosmos of Native people. And then we go to Rodin Crater right up there, where James Terrell has been sculpting the volcano to make a celestial instrument, whose forms are directly appropriated from the Kiva. Here's your Sipapu. You can walk from one world to the next world, right up into the crater, through this opening in the ceiling. And here's your Kiva, round floor, all centered in the middle, and that's us experiencing the change in that room as light goes to go. We try and go to as many different sites to kind of get a broad cultural view. Chaco is obviously the megastar, but this is Wupatki, Sinagua culture, further south. It's actually right next door to Rodin Crater. Blowhole coming up, one of the furthest north expressions of what they're calling a ball court. That's arguable. And then we go back into the earthworks. Lightning field, a geometric measurement instrument laid on the landscape. And this gentleman right here is Robert Weathers. Robert Weathers is the guy who essentially built the lightning field and has maintained it for all these years. And we have never met Di Maria, obviously we never will now, and every year we would meet Robert Weathers. And it's interesting to me how these projects become almost someone else's over time. It's the same thing as Rodin Crater with Tom Brett. Native culture really wasn't concerned with national boundaries, so we go down to Pacame in Mexico so that we can experience that same continuity. These are the parrot pens with the rock clubs to keep them protecting their way. Sun tunnels, another celestial instrument, in this case, aligned to solstice events. We look at ubiquitous forms in the Southwest. Spirals, they're everywhere. Native culture, and that sets us up to go see this big spiral on Spiral Jet. We've gone there every year for probably almost 10 years, and the lake has risen and fallen and risen and fallen. Each year is different. Here's where we could barely make our way out there without wading in. And students, as always, find crazy things to do all the way. We're trying to get off the beaten path and go find some of the cliff dwellings that are tucked in southeastern Utah, and see a kind of architectural expression, another culture that we can actually enter into and sort of experience with our bodies. And then go to Marfa, Texas, and do the height of modernism with Donald Judd. We've never been. It's one of the more amazing rooms of art I've ever experienced. And he's got, as you probably know, rooms for each of his artist choices, his furniture, his own work, and I think, if you polled my students, they all agree. And what the camel is doing there, I have no idea. We look at how a native culture carves its imagery into the landscape, and Joe Zuni comes to explain to us what the language is. And then we go look at how we carve into the surface of the planet. We go negative, and then we find a way to make it play out. Barry reef paintings. And again, back to Mexico, cuidado. It's actually not very scary. Monarchies is probably a lot safer than ours, but we do have a fear of Mexico at this point in this country. So this is Juan Mata Ortiz. There's an amazing pottery revival that has gone on in that village, starting in probably late 60s or the 70s. It's a Hispanic culture that has revived the Native American tradition, Casas Grandes tradition. So you have all the things of Mexico, and then the Native American aesthetic in pottery. We work with the potters in the village. This is Graciela Martinez and her husband, Gallegos, and they work together making pottery. They live in the same house, and when I first went down there, they had 2 rooms. They made the pots and painted them in the kitchen. This is enchiladas out, pots in, and this is how pots are fired, all done within the context of family. And then Americans come and give them cash dollars and take away the pots. It's really, and that's their work. One of the more exquisite things that I've ever seen. And this is a pot by Julie Brown, made from working with Hector and Chelsea. Okay, so phase 2 was land arts to land use. We started working with this character, and Brother Matt Coolidge, who runs the Center for Land Use Interpretation. And what Matt's point, are you people familiar with that work? Yeah. Well, what Matt did that's revolutionary, he said, why don't we just take a cultural pause? We really don't need to make anything else. Let's just, as a culture, look at what we've done and come to terms with what's happened in our landscape and make that our focus for a while. So he's in Wendover, Utah, right on I-80, big corridor for transport, train. It's also has a military base. And so we started looking at how the military is interactive with the landscape and what the military aesthetic is. And I think quite clearly there isn't. Ryan Hennell, after coming back after a hard day with the SWAT team over there. A sculpture garden a la Daikal. And this is the hangar in which the Enola Gay was kept before it went to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. Just sitting there rotting. Piece by Julie Brown. Enola Gay was Tibbet's mother's name, so he named the plane that dropped the bomb for his mother. And she did a projected poem in honor of Enola Gay, who may or may not have happened. We also started looking at industry, expand the frame further, not just art, military, industry, and looking at these huge alterations of the landscape. This is an evaporation pond for a fertilizer outfit. Also look at the aesthetics of the military industrial science complex. This is another celestial instrument, in this case, radio wave antenna. And these are each 325 tons. They all change in like sunflowers, controlled by a central computer. And they also move up and down this track, 325 tons just floating down the track. It's an incredible kinetic sculpture. Federal government, what are they doing in the landscape? This is Hoover Dam and the ring, the tub ring from Lake Mead after so many years of drought. Mines. This was at one point the largest mine in the world, copper mine outside of Salt Lake. And those trucks are enormous. So phase 3, let's get started. I think at this point, the reality of climate change had penetrated our minds, that as much as we respect and honor Matt's approach, we really moved to a more activist position. And so we formed the Art and Ecology area at UNM to be the mothership. Land Arts is the field program. And we formed what we call the Survival Kit Collective to be the instrument through which faculty and students could work together on projects that could go out in the world, not as academic exercises, but as So we went back to Louis and Wendover, and this is Simpark and Clean Living. If you're familiar with Simpark, that slide is amazingly impressed. Matt, again, on the inside, it is completely off the grid, both living space and shop, studio. This was their water system. You pedaled to town, filled it up, and pedaled back. Gave them Gloria, gave them the world. So we came in and built them a catchment system so that the Quonset hut would catch water, which they could then use in the gray water system. And then Jen did this project to try and create a place in the salt pan where you could grow food. And this is the gray water treatment to deliver water to that growing situation. If you're familiar with alkalinity, this is a very difficult project. Here's the water for the compost and material for the compost. Steve Rowell likes to shoot beer bottles with pellet guns, so that he shoots those, they fall in there, and then you put them in this drum and you seesaw them until they're pulverized to a powder that can be made into the compost as a lightener for the compost. Steve Badgett, half of Simpark, working on a wind-generated power system. Okay, next project, Lucy Raven. I don't know if anybody's seen Chinatown animation. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Dealing with the mining issues in the United States, the fact that we now mine and ship all the ore to China to have it smelted because smelters here don't want to meet the EPA requirements. This is Lucy trying for the easiest hole-in-one on the planet. So what we did was a project in honor of her project, Hole to China. So this is outside of Chloe's spot in Wendover. How many miles it is to the Hole to China, which is the mine, and then how many miles the ore is being shipped in order to get to China to be smelted. And then using Forest Service brown, we created an alternative signage for the mine itself. So, I mean, it looks like Forest Service signage, but when you get up there, it's really got a sort of different message. And we created pamphlets that went in the boxes so that you could read our notion of what the whole of China would do for a world economy and all of that, and included a zine that the students did, sort of talking about the wonders of the whole. That led to this project. People familiar with Cabinet Magazine? So that's Cabinet Magazine's, quintessential image. That's their archive. And so ArtLies in Texas asked us to build an archive right next to theirs. When we got there and saw it like this, we thought that might not be the best idea. So what we decided to do was go into Deming and trade all the archive images, issues for stories. And we traded them all over town. Met these folks who invited us to their country club for dinner, including tricks by a guy who's retired, the rodeo clown, wrote tricks. After 4 days, we had just this huge mass of stories, which we edited, took them back out to the site, and broadcast them off our van as our version of the otherwise. Okay, so this is now led us to rethink our journeys. Our journeys now are based on actual themes. And we try and focus what we're doing, our movement through the landscape, based on some line of notion. So Food Shed was the first one. We started working with an organic farm, and they needed windbreaks. And they said, you can use anything we have here. So we found all these fences, and we buried them and welded them together and planted them to create windbreaks for Los Poblanos farm. That then launched us up into southern Colorado, and looking at the whole acequia culture and how wheat is grown and wheat is processed. That came back in the form of projects by the students, like this one, where she made all the ceramics, made everything, the table, the whole thing. And if you came to the museum, 2 people at a time sat down, and then you were fed. And there was a conversation theme that was suggested
on the table. There would also be times where she would be there. And so you were brought into this conversation through the sharing of food. It's a project by my partner in land arts, Jen Hart, and Nina Dubois. This is adobe. It's growing its own grass on the roof, and it is a recycling center for the UNM sub. So all the waste food from sub comes over here to be recycled. But Nina also uses it to compose photographs for exhibition. In trying to deal with the food shed, we tried to reach out again to people who are kind of experts in the field. This is Joel Glansberg. He's been working with the Harrisons on projects both in Santa Fe and the project now in the Sierra Nevada. So he would lead a workshop on land restoration. We spent a couple of days doing the history of the soils, the rocks, the flora, the fauna, and Joel doing a topo map of our site in dirt. And then we would come up with a move that we would make, in this case using the dead piñons that died off from the drought, to make catchments, catch the soil to reestablish the grasses and hopefully turn the ecology of that site back in a positive direction. U.S.-Mexico border. We live close to the border. We are now the front line in this whole immigration issue. Seem to be astute as far as we should deal with it. So we have a community in El Paso, Barrio Buena Vista, that has been totally subsumed, cut in half, and everything else by the industrial complex. And we started working with Roberto Salas, director of the Centro there, and he asked us if we could come in and do something that would be sort of a demonstration to the village of a way to re-aestheticize an area that had really been kind of brutalized. So we did a design charrette with him, spent a day coming up with a design, which we transferred to the page, and then we took it down to the street. And this is the entrance to Barrio Buena Vista, and we translated the image onto the wall, got donations from countertop places all over El Paso for marble, and in 5 days built a 200-foot long mural for the village. That led to this, the DOT. Here's the village right here, and here's I-10, and the Department of Transportation wanted to cut through here and take another chunk of the village, and so the village asked us if we could help them. Oops. So our first move was to do a presentation to DOT and the state representatives showing all the resources, ecological resources of the region, in particular this area here that they wanted to carve up. Not convinced that our talk solved anything, we decided to just claim it, and so we made this Buena Vista emblem for the fence over the area that they wanted to carve up. In our meetings with the village people, one of the things that came up was they didn't have a bus stop and they couldn't get one built. So our next project was to build them a bus stop. So this is a design created by the students in conjunction with the members of the community, us building it and transporting it down and putting it in, and they now have a bus stop that they can sit under, especially the older people, not be in the 110-degree heat of El Paso in the summer. This is the Centro Artístico de Bonneville. This is Cement Palm, and this is our current project. We're trying to get an EPA grant to work with the community. It's right adjacent to the town, the barrio, and we're trying to get the EPA to help us fund them to do an environmental assessment and then a restoration of that pond. It's a natural pond just coming out of the hills of El Paso, strangely enough. So this is the work the students did, water sampled and then grown out in little mason jars from the lake. Portraits of the people in the village with their stories about their experiences in the lake and their favorite plants remembered. And this we then took back down to Buena Vista, the show there, and had this interactive map where they could design the park that they'd like to see made out of. And then, of course, because we were in El Paso, there had to be a party and a dance and food and a good time. We also worked with the Border Patrol down get their perspective. There's the fence, goes forever. These are the original monuments. David Taylor, who we were working with, has been taking photographs of all these monuments. This is our hike with the Border Patrol, and it was an amazing experience. Not at all what we expected. Agent Camacho here himself crossed illegally when he was 13, and their stories were not at all what you'd expect from border agents. This is us going over the line. This is some rat who made it over. Fortunately, she has a passport. David Taylor with the guys. And then the students come back and create this whole interactive game for the cartels and the U.S. Border Patrol, so that in our shows you can participate in the madness that's going on the border. This year we're in between journeys right now. Our focus is the watershed. It's the Rio Grande headwaters all the way down as far as we can go. And we started off with Amaska, which is in charge of all the royal flood controls in Albuquerque, as a way to kind of enter into this before going to the headwaters, and work with them to redesign an approach to their ponding systems that would really emphasize establishing native plants. And it was a chance for us to kind of cross over into the zones of planning and landscape architecture and work with a real agency on a real project. And that's Johnny. And if I can do this, I will. All right. And so I'll just close with this, because everything we do is absolutely serious.
It's real big. Tastes good. It's real big. Tastes good. Real big. It tastes so good. It's America. It's big.
America is big, real big. America is so big, it's bigger than Europe.
Freedom tastes good. Tastes real good. Be free.
Freedom tastes good.
Yeah. It's good to you and me.
Real big. Freedom's real big.
Yeah. Big is real free.
America's so big.
So big.
The size of Texas is bigger than Afghanistan.
We got tentacles reaching all around. Real big. Big. Freedom tastes good and big. Freedom tastes good and big.
Freedom is good
And big.
and big.
And good.
Freedom.
Freedom. Yeah.
So that's Little Bunny Crump and Johnny the Dirty Monkey. Thank you. I'd be happy to try questions if anybody's got.
Simple question, how long is people asking?
We've played around with it. We've done it on a 2-journey and 3-journey basis, but basically it's a couple of months with a week in the middle off to come back and adjust. So it's a little bit less than 2 months. I think we average between 23 and 26 days at a time now.
What time of year?
Always the fall. The spring in New Mexico is pretty brutal. So in terms of just livability. So we're in between journeys right now, and there'll be another one. We're out of the field by the end of October. And that's less about cold than it is about dark. It's just, a lot of hours of darkness.
How did you know? I mean, this is really amazing. You're going with Michael.
Yeah.
Just so that you know, this is really remarkable. And also, how to kickstart something funding-wise. You have most of the band, you've got all kinds of, how, is the university backing this initially, and are there other resources coming in?
Yeah. Well, I didn't get to start this program until I was 50. I'd already been in it for 15, 20 years. And the reason I got to start it was that Patrick Leonard, who I thank for me, heard about my interest in bringing the earthworks and the Native American things together, and he said he would help me. And that's what we started.
So the book was already an interest having a community.
Yeah, it was complete good luck that my idea got to somebody who shared that idea, who could make it happen. And it was very little. I mean, even MSO4, I started that program with $15,000. That's how it started.
And was it built into the semester-based system at that point, or did you?
Yeah, I insisted on that. They wanted me to do it as a summer program. And my experience, because I really am serious about trying to come up with a different model, and that, and I knew that if it was a summer program, it would be marginalized, and it wouldn't be dealt with seriously. So we've suffered a lot of attacks from people who are not happy with this approach, but it's serious because it's a full semester. It's 4 courses. I guess I could have talked about that. We divide the courses up right now based on issues of place, definitions, because everything changes as you go national park or all those kind of questions. And just spatially, how do you navigate the body in the spaces of the West? We do artifacts, which is right out of Matt's thing. That's really where our land use is. What are the things out there? Why are they there? How do they get there? What do you make of them? We do mapping, which it's just, we use maps all the time, and so trying to get students to see maps as an art form. It's also a place where you can trace back science and art were linked in the early map. And then the overarching one is place. What is your understanding of place through doing this program?
Pragmatics, of course, are first of all moving students around in bands through obviously some treacherous situations potentially.
Yeah.
What do you do in terms of those lovely legal issues like liability and stuff?
Well, these slides go all the way back to 2000. And the funny thing about having been in this for 13 years is our culture has changed. So when we first started doing this, there was a sense that risk is something that artists are engaged in. I know that's a strange concept now, isn't it? And we are in a much more risk-averse culture now. So some of the things, guys hanging themselves off of rocks, people pushing vans out of mud because we have to, we are much less ambitious in that sense. And it's certainly something lost. I mean, what happens when, for instance, we were driving down to the Gila to a wonderful site, and the road had been washed out. And we had to essentially build the road to get in. Now, the sense of empowerment that those students had about having gotten to that point because they built the road to get in is something none of them will ever lose. But whether you could do that today, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, I hope it's not true, but I'm worried that programs like this will be dinosaurs just because no one wants to do this. Yeah, it's a big fear. Yeah.
How many students do you have to take in a time?
Well, that is good. When I started off with 10, and then we went up to 14 when we did it with UT Austin. And now we're back to 10. And it's really 2 factors. The big one is that's 1 van with an extra seat. And so we don't have to go to a 3 van. We have 1 van for all the stuff, 1 van for, so that, but the other thing is I found like forming this social unit is a really key part of this program. And I wasn't thinking that way when we started, but you need a crew that takes care of each other. And at 10, you don't tend to break into little cliques as much as you did with 14. So I found that 10 is really like a family number. And
mix. When I started it, I thought it would be all graduate students. And I was definitely weighting our admissions towards that. Over time, I've come to learn that often it's the undergraduates who make the most incredible leaps. That they don't have a sense of themselves to live up to yet. They're really in the moment in a way. So some of the most amazing things have happened in undergrad. The other thing we try and do is save 3 or 4 slots each year from people from the outside. I think it's really important for kids from New Mexico in particular. So we've had people from Spain, from the Netherlands, from England, from Canada, and that really adds a whole other spin to the conversation to have people coming internationally. Well, we have people from Connecticut this year, maybe. But anyway, I'll tell you, we're real liberal.
I'll volunteer for Buffalo.
But you said it's 4 classes, and it
Yeah.
runs for one, I don't know, 2 semesters then?
Well, 4 classes in our system is 12 credits, and that's a load. That is a semester load. You can go up to 18 if you want to, but 12 is full-time. So that allows them to be full-time at the university, but be with us.
I see, okay, so they take the whole semester, it's like an exchange program almost.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And so after this is something else I probably should have said, but we always do an exhibition every year. And so the students, when they come back, have another 5-6 weeks in order to get ready for a show. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is this whole site non-site thing, I think, is a key issue in this kind of field practice. Is what happens out there and what happens back here? And is it just a matter of documentation? Is it a matter of translation, reiteration? How do you want to approach that question for people who are going to work in the field? And then the other thing is that the people who would not like to see this succeed have a harder time criticizing us if we do a show every year and we show the quality of the work and stuff. And so we're real strong on that.
Bill, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this transformation that happened for you in your practice as you were founding this program and your relationship with Maria in particular.
Well, I had been, I came up as a ceramic. And I got into working with all native materials. For 10 years when I first moved to New Mexico, I only worked with what I could glean from the land, from my environment. And so that got me labeled as an environmental artist. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant. So I started working with Mary Garcia out of Athens, as I mentioned. And that was the first huge shift, because she didn't see art as a practice. It was just one of the things in her life. And she didn't wear her artist hat and go to the studio. It's all art. And the sharing of food and the whole social aspect of being an artist, of working together in community, all those were things that were key to her. You know, I didn't know what social practice was. I didn't know what relational aesthetics was, but she was teaching me. And so that led to the videos that were showing just when you walked in, where I was really trying to understand life in a more complex way than kind of purely environmental work that we do before. And this goes to the whole why the environmental movement in this country crashed, because they didn't know how to deal with people. And, there were a whole lot of things that I was going through that I think the environmental movement was going through. Anyway, I was fortunate enough to meet Mary. But when I started the land use program, I was in the same situation as the students. I had 2 duffel bags, and I had 2 months every year out there. And so that's where I started to go more into the performance aspect, use my body as the tool, and use mapping as the language. And I showed just one of the maps. But that's really what I've been doing in recent years, is using my body to we've had an earth together to try and walk. It's too long. But anyway, my practice has changed almost entirely from a material-based practice to a performative-based practice, due to the fact that I have to live in a tent for 2 months every year and make art alongside everybody else.
And other outcomes in terms of now what's happened with some of the students in the original first years? I'd love to hear how that transpired.
Yeah, when I first started, and I got this first check from Pat Plan, I said, thank you very much. What would you like to see? And he said, Bill, I want you to change people's lives. Oh, okay.
And there are people, Eric Osborne, who was painting the backs, she went to West Virginia and opened really an art and ecology program, field-based program there around mountaintop removal, and that whole thing is going on in West Virginia. And then Yoshi Hayashi, I'm not sure what he's from, but he's now out in San Diego, and he's running a program where he takes students to the desert, and then he takes them to LA, and looks at that axis. I've got another student who's in Wisconsin now, and he's doing all this, I think, fascinating video work. He went with me to Australia last year. We did some projects over there in the Outback. So and then there's a guy who's making it big in New York doing installation work, totally urban, totally. So I don't know. I guess I'm more interested in the fact that people sort of got some energy and found a direction of this, rather than there's a specific practice. And so it's been pretty, I mean, at this point, we probably have 120, 130 students who've gone through it. So it's interesting to see all the variations.